in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Ernst, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Secretary Dalton, Dr. Schmidt, and Dr. Erickson. It is very nice to have you all here today, and thank you for your service to our great nation. Ms. Dalton, we're going to follow on with a theme that you've heard from many of the members already today, and that's starting with the crisis at our southern border. So you may have noticed in the news, we have a lot of candidates. They came through Iowa. Many of them are talking about the issues that are really important to Americans. Top two issues, one is the economy and the other is the crisis at the southern border. So, Ms. Dalton, in your time as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs at the Department of Defense, you played a key role in the department's plans regarding the disposal of unused border wall construction materials to protect the homeland. And at the end of DoD's disposition process to transfer these materials, there were exactly 14,795 steel tubes remaining. Do you know how much the taxpayers initially paid for these unused materials?
Senator, thank you for raising this really important challenge, which is the crisis at our southern border. In my time as Assistant Secretary, I have conducted regular visits to the southwest border to understand the strain that is being placed on our states, local authorities, and Border Patrol. And just in FY23, the Department of Defense has provided $608 million in border security support to DHS and counter-narcotics support to DHS and other federal departments and agencies.
The question would be, do you know how much the materials cost?
So for the specific materials, Senator, I know that in our August letter that was seeking to be responsive, collecting information from across the department, because this is not in my portfolio. I understand from the Defense Logistics Agency that at that time it was $130,000.
Okay, that was to safeguard those materials. The actual cost to the taxpayers for those materials was $4.4 million. And then with the disposition through the DLA, do you know how much the department auctioned them off for?
Senator, I would have to defer to the Defense Logistics Agency because they are the lead proponent in the Department of Defense for this issue. It is not in my portfolio, Senator.
So I guess I'm struggling to understand because maybe your portfolio doesn't include defense of the homeland?
Senator, it includes defense support of civil authorities, which is when the Department of Homeland Security sends requests to the Department of Defense for support. We evaluate those requests to determine if they're legal, if it's appropriate use of the U.S. military per posse comitatus, if it is going to impact training and readiness for our U.S. military given our warfighting primary mission. And then we provide those recommendations based on the input of components across the Department of Defense to the Secretary of Defense for a decision. I have no role to play, Senator.
So civil authorities are not used in constructing border materials or would not have any regards for securing our southern border?
We have not received a request from the Department of Homeland Security to use DoD forces in that manner. And so that request has not come through my office.
Okay. So based on the information that was provided to us by the Department of Defense, back to the original question, the materials were actually sold to a private buyer for $156,000. So I understand you're saying it's not under your portfolio, and yet you responded to a letter that was sent in regards to this. So I guess you can understand why the committee is having a hard time understanding how you're saying somebody else is in charge of this, and yet you're responding to a written request from Congress.
Senator, I was sent a letter from several members of Congress, and because I am a Senate-confirmed official, I take that very seriously. Although this issue is not in my portfolio, I went on a fact-finding mission with my team to collect inputs from across the Department of Defense, from those that have oversight and responsibility for this issue, in order to answer the
Okay.
questions that
I appreciate that. I am running out of time. So what I want our taxpayers to understand, though, is it seems that we have a number of different entities within the Department of Defense that are completely siloed. And while you're doing a fact-finding mission, across the board and going to other departments, you didn't take the time to question and follow up in a timely manner. It did take about 5 months to respond to that letter. You simply could have responded, since you take congressional oversight very seriously. You could have responded back to the chairman or back to the ranking member stating that this belongs to another entity within the Department of Defense. But you did go on that fact-finding mission, taking some of that responsibility upon yourself. And unfortunately for our taxpayers, we now see that these materials have been sold for pennies on the dollar, about 3 cents for every dollar that the federal government spent on it. And yet we have some additional auctions that are coming up where people are reselling the materials that they just bought from DLA, and they have been receiving 10 times as much as what they paid to get those tubes from the federal government. So there's a big scheme going on here where people are making a ton of money off of the taxpayers. And so we've got to get to the bottom of this. I appreciate your answers and the follow-up 5 months after the letter was sent, but more to follow. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Hirono.